Martin, parking's a big deal. Cities complain about it. Individuals live in cities complain about it. What is the current state of the market?
I think that's a really interesting start. Parking is probably one of the most engaging topics you can do. Like everyone hates parking, but everyone actually needs parking. So I think parking is really a tool for cities and business to manage mobility. And I think in reality, it's a way to help people to get from point A to point B in a more efficient way. But in reality, a journey for a customer is never going from A to B. It's actually going from A to B via P. I think parking and especially lack of managing parking have a massive impact on mobility and traffic flows within a city. I do think that parking will become even more important for cities to manage going forward due to the fact that more and more people moving into cities. So then the scarcity of space and competition of space will be harder going forward. So this is going to be an even more interesting topic going forward. So I'm excited to be here and talk about parking.
What's the business of parking?
I think business of parking, people typically don't think about it, but parking is more similar to a real estate business where the landowner, typically a city or a private landowner, get a rent or revenue for the utilization of the space. Today, majority of this space is either heavily subsidized by a city or given out for free. So in the US, 9 out of 10 cars or 9 out of 10 parking spots in today is not regulated, but there's still a very competitive need of that parking space. And if you look at the whole landscape of parking, there's multiple actors acting in this. We have parking operator, you have digital parking companies such as us, where you have really high competition around the space, supporting the landowner to increase use and increase the customer experience around the usage of that space.
What type of margins are there? And I ask you because the former owner of the LA Dodgers, before his divorce, Frank McCormick, made a lot of his money in Boston parking lots. If you're going to buy the LA Dodgers, you got to have healthy margins. What type of margins are there in the parking business?
If you look at the parking business and you think about a city, the second largest revenue stream for majority of the Western world cities today is parking. People don't think about this one. The first one, of course, is taxes. The second largest revenue stream of a city is parking. Due to the reason that parking is often heavily subsidized, implementation of paid parking has a massive contribution for the landowner of that space. But majority of the margin goes to the landowner itself. So if you want to make money in parking, you should be a landowner.
If you're going to be a landowner, but the city owns the road, and is that why they have meter maids to basically enforce a tax or a toll on their land to ensure that revenue keeps going? Because being the number 2 largest revenue generator for a city behind taxes is pretty impressive. I didn't think I'd made fines or something. I didn't think it would be parking.
It's surprisingly, when you look into this, there's a lot of people that don't realize this one. But I think cities typically, I think this depends on what type of city and where you are in the world, but it generates a lot of revenue. In reality, this is more a way to make sure that you can reinvest money into mobility. And if you look at the most successful cities that really managing mobility, they typically use parking for 2 reasons. They use parking to make sure that you charge for the usage of public space. Those funds should then be reinvested into other modes of transportation and mobility within a city. So I think Amsterdam is a perfect example in Europe that set a 25-year plan for mobility where they talk with the public to say that we're going to start regulating and increase price for parking, but we're going to reinvest those money into public transportation, buses and metro stations, reinvest it into bike lanes to get into the city. And by doing so, you're actually increasing the utilization of public transportation while actually making parking more available for the ones that actually need parking.
Parking to me seems a lot of it's going to be driven by continents, geographics. You have exposure in the US, the EU, and the UK. How do you see the parking differentiating in those 3 continents?
Maybe a slight correction to that one. If we, at least how we look at this one, I would say that Europe and US primarily have been the leading factor to think about regulated parking. But if you think about this on a macro level, only 10% of the world population live in Europe and US. Majority of the population lives in other geographies in the world, but the same problem applies wherever you live in the world, which means that you have urbanization where people move into cities, increase competition about the public space. So even in a world like in 2100, the largest city in the world will be Lagos, Nigeria, which is projected to have 80 million people in the city. They're going to have a massive problem to think about how to manage mobility and parking. But if you look at Europe and US, there's still a lot of headwinds to manage parking as well in these geographies. And I think cities are getting more and more active in terms of managing their own mobility within the city.
When they manage it, is that where the digital layer comes in, where cities are looking to put digital layers on top of the physical real estate that they own so they can properly monetize it?
In particular, I think the digital layers help them managing it in a better way. So typically what happened in the past was cities starting to regulate parking by deploying a parking meter or pay and display machine on the street, and they collected revenue and they set an arbitrary price for what the price should be to park on a certain street. I think with technology solutions similar to what EasyPark and Park Mobile is providing today, we can actually provide them with data about what is the supply and demand of parking on a very granular level on different times of the day in different times of the week. And the city can actually then set the right pricing and policies to manage mobility given what the actual demand and supply is at any given time. I think this has been a kind of fallacy in the past where you set an arbitrary price without access to the right type of data.
Is dynamic pricing for parking currently live anywhere in the world today?
There's been some tests around. I think here in the US, they've done some tests, and they've done some tests in Europe as well. I think the problem with dynamic pricing is that you increase the risk. If you want to change behavior, you want to make sure it's predictable for you as a consumer to know what the price is. So I think like in the near term, the best way of actually impacting mobility is to provide differentiating pricing, but they are predictable for you as a consumer. So in some of the tests, when you do dynamic pricing, you have already taken the choice to take your car when you go downtown. But if you come downtown and the price for parking is now 8 times more expensive, it's actually a risk of you start cruising around the city trying to find a cheaper parking spot, which actually increase congestion in the city. I think how cities should really think about this is do differentiating pricing and say like certain hours of the day, we know that the occupancy is high. So therefore we provide transparency that the price will be higher during these hours. And then consumers can plan their trip in ahead. But doing dynamic pricing when you arrive will not change the consumer behavior because you're already driven for 40 minutes with your car downtown and now you're late for your lunch, which means that you either will cruise around trying to find a cheaper one or you will anyhow pay for the same price as you did before.
Where do events? Obviously, we have the European Football Championships going on now. In America, we have baseball, and all over the world there's concerts. And the closer you get to that venue, there's some clever entrepreneur there. Want to park in my yard? $50. You get close to the venue, want to park in my yard? $75. The price keeps going up as you get closer to the venue, and then, oh, wait a second, 5 minutes of showtime. Lower the price. Let's fill it in. That's a low-tech version of dynamic pricing. So where do events fit in? Because a lot of events are hosted in major cities around the world.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. That's probably the closest you get to dynamic pricing. I think the private parking operators in particular are probably better in terms of doing dynamic pricing, especially around events. What we've seen in event types as well is that there's actually a need and a wish for consumers to be able to reserve a parking spot before you arrive. And there is actually technology out there today for reserving parking spots when you go into your local baseball game. The biggest challenge we and our industry peers have today is that how do you train consumers to reserve a parking spot? Because parking is a very low engagement industry. I think, Grayson, you probably never woke up in the morning thinking it's going to be fun to pay for parking. You typically arrive at the location and say, oh, I actually need to pay those $75 for my parking. But there is technology today to reserve a parking spot to guide you to the closest destination or reservation. When you arrive at the arena, you have more time to spend time in the arena versus trying to find the best parking spots. But I think we and our industry peers here have some work to do to train consumers that this is an available option.
Here in the States, you're seeing it with baseball games now, especially spring training. You pay $20 or $25 to park. You get there. Okay, so I prepay for it. Where do I go? Next thing you know, you're right next to the stadium. This was great. I'll do it every time. And if you don't do it, they send you the lot across the street and you have to walk. So that's an example of trying to train the consumer, hey, for $5 more, you can just basically park across the street. But getting onto the Europe side with the football championships, your average individual who's driving to the match is driving around for 20 minutes looking for a spot. Is reserve parking a way to potentially fix that, or is there another alternative to fix it for that individual's not driving around 20 minutes looking for a spot to park?
I think like the 20 minutes searching for parking, that is in particular in this European Championship and big event happenings. But this is not an unusual experience for consumers that go downtown and trying to figure out how to park. So I think there's, especially around event parking, I think reservations is a perfect example for reducing congestion to find parking. But I think this is also where cities and event planners should really think about the supply and demand. And if you know there is a peak of demand, you should really think about, can you extend the supply of parking spots, or can you offer alternative mode of transportation to these places? And this is a little bit what I mentioned before with some of the European cities that really think about how can you subsidize and move some of this need to other modes of transportation, and therefore balancing supply and demand. And this is in particular tricky during peak hours. And this is something that a lot of cities are struggling with today, is that if you ask a random citizen, do we have too many parking spots or too few? Two different persons can say that it's too many and there's too few at the same time, and both are right. Because you might have too few places in a certain part of the city, but you have too many in others. And during a certain time of day you have. So really think about supply and demand as a way for making sure you can reduce search time for consumers. But this requires a lot of data, and I think cities could really help, Park Mobile and many of our industry peers, to make better and well-informed decisions.
When you look at making better informed decisions in reserve parking, the first thing that comes to my mind is personally owned autonomous vehicles. They're coming. We had the announcement from Rimac for the Verne. It was really clever, named after Jules Verne, and watched the interview on Top Gear, and they made a very clever, very brief remark about being able to control the vehicle for the day. And Miss Mary Barra, the chair and CEO of GM, was talking about personally owned autonomous vehicles, and Tesla has done it as well. It's coming. It's going to be a big trend. It's going to actually be bigger than robotaxis, in my opinion. Well, if you're going to a football match or going to a baseball game, what you described, can you reserve a spot for your autonomous vehicle? Okay, so the vehicle's picking you up at your home, or you're leaving your home. You're going to the match or the game, the vehicle parks in that spot ahead of time. Does that become a catalyst to potentially drive adoption, where the vehicle has a place to sleep when it's not being used in the personally owned example?
I think this is a perfect example where, and you kind of pointing it, like, I don't think in an autonomous world, I don't think you as a consumer should reserve a spot. This is where the car itself should be intelligent enough to reserve a spot for them. Because you think about it, like, even in a world where you don't even have an autonomous vehicle, why do you as a Grayson need to pay for parking? Why can't the car pay for you yourself? Because if you know that you're in a regulated parking zone and you're stopping your vehicle, the car itself should be able to detect that you're standing still, and that's the definition of parking, and therefore they start a transaction for you. I think this is where we and others will have to work with innovation to help you as a consumer remove friction, to remove this choice, because it's not something that you're gonna miss. If we solve that problem for you, you're not gonna miss paying for parking.
No, you're not going to miss for it. So let's go back to the innovation side. Does Park Mobile become the parking OS for autonomous vehicles, where it's already built in? Your credit card's on file. It already knows. You just say, okay, car, take me to game. And then it already knows what to do.
I think this is a very likely scenario where Park Mobile will start working together with OEMs to provide parking experience, both in terms of reserving parking spots when you go into a game, but even when you're in a city. Why do you as a consumer need to park and pay for parking? When you're dropping off at a certain location, the car should be able to drive away to a nearby parking spot and park, and therefore also paying for parking. And I think that requires a lot of data, both in terms of what is the available parking spots around you, as well as how do you actually pay for parking, and what is the right parking fee. And if you go around like in Europe and you go up to a random street, parking regulation is very complicated. You can see street signs with parking rules that have 8 different signs below each other, and you as a consumer, you need to have an IQ of 200 to understand, can I actually park here or not? I think this is where we can help OEM manufacturers and technology companies to digitalize the analog world of parking.
Now you've got me thinking. So we're going to have some fun here. We're going to have this what-if scenario. There's a very large movement towards subscriptions for vehicles and for autonomous vehicles. And I start to think about the future of autonomous vehicles. Use Tesla, for example. They're currently going for a insurance license in all 50 states of the United States. I believe they have 18 to 22, not sure the exact number on that, where they're licensed to sell Tesla insurance. Then they obviously have the supercharging network. So you're going to bundle in my opinion, FSD, full self-driving, insurance, your lease payment into one thing. What if you added another layer on there and you bundled in parking? Okay, for an additional fee a month, when you bundle in, you can get X amount of parking, because you can't do unlimited because somebody's going to take advantage of it. But could you get to the point where parking is already bundled into that? Obviously, you're going to have your super users that are going to use it in places where they charge parking, and other users where they don't really do it, but it starts to level out. Do we get to a point where parking could potentially be integrated into one of these autonomy subscriptions?
There's probably multiple ways how you can structure these kind of things. I think why is the reason that you pay for parking? The biggest reason you pay for parking is to avoid a parking fine or getting booted. Right, that's the reason why you're actually paying. So I think like even an insurance or a subscription where you say, hey, you still have to pay for the amount of parking you're doing and the usage of parking, but you pay a subscription for never ever getting a parking fine in your life. That is probably a quite attractive value proposition to a consumer. I think this requires a lot of work for us in the industry to help out doing this one, but I can see a scenario where we can support the autonomous vehicles to never think about parking before. But do you think that's an important note in terms of parking is still here as an important thing for cities and operators? Because especially in an autonomous world, the worst thing that could happen in a city is that you have cars that are empty that drives around in the city, because they actually create more congestion, which impacting all the other autonomous vehicle around you, and they create more air pollution in the city. It's a terrible experience. It's a wear and tear of the infrastructure in the city. So cities really need to think about like how do you make sure that you incentivize the autonomous vehicles to park or being in other places when they're empty and do not drive either passenger or packages.
Where do you see those autonomous vehicles parking? Do you see them going into a city center garage? Do you see them going to perhaps something on the outside city? There was always the debate, well, parking garages are going to go away. I said, but it makes no sense for the vehicle to drive 20 miles away to come 20 miles back. Makes no sense because the individual's not going to want to wait. Does that whole urban myth, which it was years ago, these are going to become green spaces, do those become autonomous vehicle staging lots where they get cleaned, they get charged because the infrastructure is already there, and to put electrical infrastructure in to modify it is not a big financial upgrade?
I think and I might be biased because I've been in the parking industry for a while here, but I do think that parking, both off-street parking as well as on-street parking, will still remain. The question is then the balance of what is the amount that will remain. But I think one thing that typically, at least I think about when you think about autonomous vehicle, what are you as a consumer looking for? You're looking for convenience to make sure that you can get picked up the same way you could be before or even more efficient, which means that in a fully autonomous vehicle, you don't want to wait 20 minutes for your car to come downtown. You want to make sure it can park closely where you are. And even in a world where you don't own your own autonomous vehicle, like during peak hours, you definitely don't want to wait for 25 minutes to get your ride being picked up. So I think it's going to be more thinking about how do you balance. And I think there might be off-site lots where demand of parking is low that you might go away and temporary park. But then if you're doing short-term visits or you go to a restaurant, you don't want to wait for 20 minutes for your car to arrive. And the cities don't want to have empty cars driving around back in and out of the city because that has a massive implication of the infrastructure itself. So I do think it's going to be probably both hubs within the city as well as hubs outside when they have low peak demand for autonomous vehicles.
Because you're right. If you have a rural city, perhaps, okay, it's easier to move around and small population. Okay, then you're going to go long routes. But in a dense urban environment, you're going to have that infrastructure there, which nobody talks about. There was years ago, LA Times article, LAS parking in Southern California region. I don't remember the headline, so I'm going to improvise here. Sorry if I misquote this because I probably will. LAS parking is going out of business because of autonomous vehicles. What you and I are describing, they become a catalyst to your business. They become this cash cow. Or I'll give you a term, steroids. You're going to inject some steroids into the business. They can help you grow. Is that how you're currently viewing autonomous vehicles?
Yeah, for me, I think like autonomous vehicle is going to be, and we're excited about the autonomous vehicle. I think the trickiest question is when is this going to be fully adopted and how will this look like? I think the biggest challenge is going to be how fast cities can adopt their current policies and their way of managing mobility within a city. I think it's not going to be LAS or SP Plus or any of the private operators. They will be much nimble and quicker to adjust to this new reality. And I think your point around like LAS and SP Plus will be able to provide additional service for self-driving cars. They also still need to be maintained clean. They need to be charged. All these things where they are in a really good position to be able to support these companies. They kind of go into this industry. So I think they're having actually a quite fantastic business, and I think they're going to be well prepared to serve this transformation when and if it comes.
It's going to come. It's going to come.
Let me rephrase myself. I fully agree. I think the question is just when and in which order it comes from a geography point of view. But I fully agree with you. I think this is a direction of travel. So I'm excited about that future.
I'll give you a point. We're seeing patterns. There's patterns in the markets now. So I was at San Francisco market, Los Angeles market, Phoenix market, Dallas, Houston, Atlanta, Miami. Those are going to be your major concentration hubs, probably for at least for the next 5 years. At some point, I believe, I've said this forever, Mickey Mouse in Orlando is going to get into the game. There's just so many people to move, and it makes so much sense. But it's going to be southern cities to start with autonomous vehicles. It was interesting, getting back to the Rimac, the Vern vehicle, they want to create these big, massive hubs. To me, it seems that it's not necessary. It seems that the existing infrastructure can be updated. Are you seeing trends in parking now where traditional parking operators are starting to put in EV charging and then saying, oh, come in for a charge. We'll give you a parking spot and a charge. Are you starting to see any sort of combination starting to emerge in the traditional parking world today?
I would say both yes, on the fact I think that is not needed, as well as the fact that the parking operators. So I'm originally from Sweden in Europe. And I would say like a lot of the parking operators in Europe have already started the transformation journeys against becoming a mobility hub, where they will serve. One of the use cases they have is electrical vehicle charging, but also other services, as you mentioned. Like when you go in there, like how can you make sure you get maintenance of your car, you're getting your car clean when you're anyhow going into doing your shopping for the weekend. And I would say in Europe in particular, which probably is 10 years ahead of US in both digital parking as well as EV, many parking operators are now obliged to implement EV charging due to legislation done by governments in their country. And this is actually I would say one of the trickiest things for a lot of parking operators to manage, because it requires massive amount of capex to implement EV charging. But the margins are very slim for doing so. So parking operators get forced to implement things that they might not get return on investment. I think long term, they will definitely have a strategic play where they can provide EV infrastructure to cars like autonomous cars. But I think they're having a short-term challenge of doing implementation of EV before the EV ecosystem have been established and are fully functional.
Will it be more challenging for those operators to operate EVs than it will be autonomous vehicles?
It's a good question. I think the parking operator probably need to change the capabilities they have within the company, because if you think about EV charging with consumers like you and I, is a different types of consumer behavior you need to manage and complexity around it. When you have autonomous vehicles, I think it's more around having a very lean operations and make sure that the services are efficient, but it requires less human interactions. I'm not sure it's going to be more complicated, but I think they really need to figure out how to develop new capabilities and operational efficiencies around autonomous vehicles. So it's going to be a transformation for them, similar to others in the industry when this technology is being adopted.
It's going to be a transformation, but the autonomous vehicle industry is doing what the EV industry failed to do, and they still fail to do. The autonomous vehicle industry is training technicians to operate on these vehicles, to fix these vehicles. On the heavy-duty side, Ryder has done a fantastic job training technicians to work on autonomous trucks, and perhaps somebody similar to Ryder does it for passenger vehicles. On the EV side, they have a technician problem. Their hardware breaks all the time. I have an EV. It's a piece of junk. It broke. It's a lemon. At the same time, my home charger broke in less than a year, and they wanted me to pay $1,000. Well, go pound sand. It's a piece of junk. There's a common denominator there. The equipment doesn't work, and when you look at the hardware that's out there for EVs and you go on Reddit, and there's some really great subreddits, there's horror stories about this. I took my family to a spring training game this spring. We get to the stadium. Across there is a charger. 2 of the 6 chargers were broken. And there's a gentleman there fixing it. Sir, I'm here every day. I know this is a common problem. Are the parking operators, are they responsible for fixing these chargers that are operating there? Are they dealing with the same problem as an EV owner?
I think you're hitting a point where I think is also a struggle with the adoption of EV, both from a consumer point of view, but also an investment point of view. I think we as a collective have been rushing the implementation of EV infrastructure before the EV infrastructure was ready. So we're now living in a world where you have a lot of legacy deployment that is not really good. But for a consumer, you don't care if it's a legacy solution or not. You just see that this is not working. I do think that, and I can see some of the operators and the CPOs out there is starting to get at least more efficient and more effective. But I think they're struggling still with, as a consumer, there's still 2 out of 6 that doesn't work. And the plug that you needed to your car is not compatible with a charge point that you're getting to, or the payment doesn't go through because there's less connectivity in the garage. I think this is a very complicated thing. So the operators, I think, do struggle, but I would say they're getting also more and more efficient as the technology develops and gets better. But they're going to live with some legacy here for a long period of time due to the high costs and capex investment required.
Are the parking operators making that capex investment in electric vehicles? Or are they saying, well, wait a second, let's look at the Edmunds data, let's look at the TrueCar data? Consumers are shifting to hybrids in pretty large numbers, and a lot of consumers that buy EVs outside of Tesla are going to hybrids simply because they work. Are they pulling back on that capex and saying, wait a second, we don't have to spend all this money because the market is clearly shifting?
I would say it's probably like a geography call for that one, but I think in many geographies, especially in Europe, this is not a mandatory is a mandatory obligation they get pushed from the government, where they need to invest. And there's, especially in Scandinavia where I'm from, there's requirements of how many charging posts should you have in a garage with X number of spots. Because in Norway, for example, 9 out of 10 cars fully electrical, and they will sell the last petrol car in 2025. So this puts requirements from the government that the parking operator needs to invest in EV independent of the usage itself. But I do think the parking operator trying to optimize the usage, and that's where I think the interplay between parking and charging become really important, because the worst thing that could happen is you having someone blocking a charging pole, only charge for 30 minutes but park for 4 hours. So I think the combination on how you manage parking policy and charging policy becomes even more important for a parking operator.
How do you do that? If you look at traditional parking, you park on the street, you got a boot. That's one example. Or you do something bad, you get towed. You block a driveway, the tow truck comes. But, this is a big but, if the electric vehicle's plugged in, you can't have a kablooey situation where it pulls out the electrical infrastructure. What is that policy? Is it a 10x, 20x? I'll be draconian. 100x fine if you don't move it? How are those policies going to be developed, and how are they going to be enforced?
Typically, how it's been done in Europe so far is there's two things. So one is, if you do not charge, the parking fine or the charging fine in this example is a massive one. So it needs to be, it needs to be a real burn if you're not charging and parking. But what they typically do though is that they do a progressive tariff. So if you, during the time that you do charge, you only pay for the charging fee or for the electrical fee. And then if you stop charging but you continue parking, you have a progressive parking fee that goes up that you need to pay for every hour or every minute that you stay. I think in Europe in particular, it's different in terms of parking. So in the US, you typically buy times. You buy 2 hours of parking. In Europe, primarily the mode of paying for parking is you pay per minute. So you start your transaction, and when you're leaving, you're stopping your transaction, and you only pay for 1 hour and 17 minutes if you're only staying for 1 hour and 17 minutes. But then the parking operator can work with progressive tariffs to make sure that you pay additional fee the longer you stay without charging, which incentivizes consumers to move the car.
Autonomous vehicles solve that problem. They just move. Time's up. They move to the next spot. It seems that they're going to be the city's best friend. They're going to be the parking operator's best friend. They're going to be the toll enforcement's best friend.
And the consumer's best friend, ideally.
Yes, I can't wait to get a personally owned AV. They're coming. On the policy standpoint, you bring up a lot of really good points around the European Union market versus the US market. Then we have the UK market. You have exposure in all three markets, different policies. From the policy standpoint, you're from Scandinavia. You have different countries that make up the European Union, the bloc, the continent, any term that you want to use. Are you seeing the EV parking policies? Are they coming from the EU, or are they coming from the state level? Where are they coming from on the European continent?
Europe is a complicated way in how it works. I think the European Union have incentives that they drive the local country to implement, but I would say this is really driven by each country. And I would say like the majority of the trends coming from Scandinavia and moving south. So if you look at this one, the adoption, the Nordic countries, Finland, Sweden, Norway, and Denmark have the highest adoption of EV. They going through all the change curve of what actually works and doesn't work. I think we as an industry player can help transforming experience of what works versus what doesn't work. And we have a lot of experience going through this change journey. And then I would say that the richer the country is, the more subsidies and incentives they do to drive adoption of EV. And I think that's why Norway has been so successful, is that the Norwegian state had been early in providing a lot of subsidies to adopt EV. In the beginning, it was subsidized cars, free tolling when you went into the city, free parking, you could drive in bus lanes, you get free electricity. And what happened then after, they started removing incentives one by one, and now it's expensive to have an EV car as having a petrol car. And they actually then now go in the other direction and put in increased cost of owning a petrol car versus having the normal price for an EV. So they've been really good in terms of driving incentives for adoption.
How is their parking policies over there? Is it running on one of the EasyPark software apps, or what are their parking policies over there, since they do have the highest concentration of adoption of electric vehicles of any country in the world?
Many places in Europe, we see what we call an open market, where the city is authorizing multiple technology providers to provide a service and compete against the end users. We're providing mobile pay parking technology to the city of Oslo. The city of Oslo sets the parking policy and the parking price. We help them with data insights to them for them making the right advices, but then we're competing against multiple other players to create the best consumer experience. I think that's what we believe is the best way to drive innovation. We love having competitors, because that keeps us on their toes. And I think this is where it's a little bit different in the US, where this trend is coming to the US as well. I think the last couple of years we've seen a lot of adoption for multi-vendor and open market. But I would say again here, being a little bit later on the adoption versus European markets. But in reality, it's often the city and the parking operators that dictate and set the parking policy terms to think about how that impacts mobility within the city.
Going back to the founding of EasyPark in 2001 in Scandinavia, that area, that part of the world was very early on cell phones with Ericsson, with Nokia. The brick phones were great. The N90 was great. The Terminator phone that would open up. There's a lot of innovation around text messaging. I believe it was the prime minister broke up with his wife or his girlfriend over a text message to Finland at one point, and that was a really big deal around the innovations of cell phones. So you've had this very early adoption in the culture around mobile phone technology. What advantage has that given the group as expanded farther deep into the EU, to the UK, and then eventually to the US?
Our company was founded in 2001. That was before the kind of first IT bubble happened. So the founders at that time were super innovative. I think the problem they were way before their time. So they actually created what I will call like a virtual blockchain. So they created a mobile wallet to create payments through your phone. The problem at that time, it was not cheaper, it was not more efficient, it didn't really work, but it was sexy. So one of the solutions they had was they provided B2B offerings to fleet companies to be able to pay for parking through your phone. They did that by basically having a phone number where you as Grayson could call up and say, I want to park my car on the street, park my car ABC123 for 2 hours and charge my account. We then consolidated that one in a monthly billing to the company, and they could do all the expense management in an efficient way. But I think like the biggest, that was a way for us to really quickly start adopting. And once smartphone was a fact, the adoption curve spiked through the roof, because digital payments is super high adoption in Sweden. Everyone has smartphones. Everyone is looking for like technology for adoption. So super high adoption. But it also helped us being in a market like Sweden. You kind of need to build the company to scale globally, because the market in Sweden itself is not big enough for building a company. I think that's why you see a lot of technology companies from Scandinavia being successful, is they build technology to scale globally from the start. So you can take companies like Spotify or Klarna or others that's building solutions because they know that they're not going to stay in Sweden for a long period of time before they need to grow globally. And I think that kind of mindset have helped us a lot in terms of how can we use the learning we have had in Scandinavia to scale globally, being aware of things are different wherever you go in the world. You cannot apply the same logic you learn in one place. You need to adopt to local culture and local policies. But we build a platform that is scalable enough to manage complexity and variance in the market.
How do you adapt to the local culture and also the customs that come with those local cultures? Do you hire individuals from that country, from that region, that understand the nuances that in order to do business in that region?
We don't have it, I would say, any kind of headquarters today. We're trying to have center of excellence with competence, but then we really hire local experts and colleagues that know the local culture, the local, regulatory frameworks, etc. But we're, as a company, we're really trying to drive our common values and behaviors. And we're trying to recruit people that have local knowledge, but aligns with our values and our vision and mission. So I think that's been a success factor for us, is being able to drive a common vision, but knowing the local nuances. And we've been lucky enough to get a lot of good, talented people in we're active today in more than 20 countries around the world. And we've been really lucky to find good talents across the globe here.
20 countries is impressive. There's probably another 20 countries coming. In your opinion, what does the future of parking look like?
I think you're right. It's probably not only 20 countries, it's probably 180 additional countries that we need to capture. If we look at parking in particular, parking is one of the few global problems. It doesn't really matter where you are in the world. The scarcity of space in an urban environment is the same wherever you go in the world. And sometimes we get confused, and I get confused when I look at it. It's amazing that we're in Europe and US and Australia, but in fact, we're only covering 10% of the world population. Going forward, the mega clusters of the world will not be in US or Europe. They're going to be in Africa and Asia and Latin America, but they're going to have the same problem in a larger scale, how to manage mobility. So for us, there's going to be an exciting journey from seeing how cities outside of the main geographies is adopting regulated parking and managing mobility. And I think this podcast in particular is super excited, because I really see a world where parking becomes more driven by technology and less human interaction. And whenever I'm successful enough to leave this company, I do hope that we come as far as you as a consumer do not need to think about parking anymore. That's the definition, I think, of success here.
That's a great definition. Parking, from what you described, autonomy is going to make it a growth market. Parking will be integrated into your autonomous vehicle, your electric vehicle, your hybrid vehicle. That's going to be integrated, and they're not going to think about it, because right now it's a pain, but solutions such as EasyPark's building can eliminate that friction. Martin, as we look to wrap up this insightful conversation for today, what would you like our listeners and viewers to take away with them?
What I want to share is that it's really important to think about how the fact that EV infrastructure will not be solved near term. It's going to be a lot of friction for consumers over a longer period of time. I think as we go along, this will become better and better. Autonomous vehicles will also increase customer experience, but this is also a need for cities to more actively managing how to think about parking mobility when you go into this one. And I think overall, we should all be better in using smarter technology and data to improve cities and infrastructure overall. And I think this will at least hopefully achieve what we're trying to do here to make cities more livable.
We want to make cities more livable. That's all of our goal, and we will get there. Parking will play a very large role in the future of autonomy. It's not going away. It's going to be enhanced. The future is bright. The future is autonomous. The future is parking. Martin, thank you so much for coming on the road to autonomy today.
Thank you for having me.